Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the new normal, so to speak, where obviously Zoom and situations like this put us in a position where we don't unfortunately get to see one another, but you can surely, or at least hopefully, hear my voice and things are coming through as clearly as possible. But before we get started, I wanted to first say thank you to each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule. And obviously at this point, probably very unconventional lives to expand your horizons as it relates to our game and anything and everything that we can continue to do to become better coaches and gatekeepers of this wonderful game. So I want to spend a little bit of time doing is speaking through the NFL way to play and give a very broad perspective of what the NFL way to play is truly about. And there will hopefully be questions, but more so, I would like to first off address a concern. Where I know oftentimes with this game, when we hear these initiatives or we read about these initiatives that are intended to be more protective as it relates to player safety, many football purists can get a bit uncomfortable. But I think that discomfort can be put to the side as of now, because I believe that the NFL way to play is a unique approach to developing the game of tomorrow through the lenses of eliminating unnecessary risk within our game. That is the fundamental driving force of the NFL way to play. So we hear and we look at the mission of the NFL way to play. It seeks to apply science, research, data, and experience to promote proper playing technique, protect players from unnecessary risk, and foster culture change to attain on-field excellence at all levels of the game. Now, I think the key or operative words or phrases within this mission are few, but let's just talk about and focus on one of them right now, which is unnecessary risk. Protect players from unnecessary risk. And that operative word of unnecessary is really what we want to focus on here, simply because we understand and appreciate the risk involved with this game is really what makes the game truly what it is. It gives our young athletes and even our older athletes an opportunity to experience all of what the game has to offer. However, as it relates to how we're coaching our players, as it relates to the drills that we're utilizing to develop our players, we have to ask ourselves, are we exposing our players to unnecessary risk? The game within itself has its own inherent risk, but what we don't want to do as coaches, as teachers, is to complicate the game and provide an additional layer of unnecessary risk, which in turn obviously isn't solely beneficial to the player. Now, you may say, well, where does all this concept come from? Which goes back to the initial. It's based on research and data. And I think in a world that we live in today, we all can appreciate research and data. Now, I guess you could say the complexity of that is, where do you typically want to align your beliefs? Thus, which side of the fence as it relates to the science do you want to live on? But when it comes down to the research and the data that has been collected over the years, we're talking about some of the foremost experts in the industries related to protecting young athletes and protecting our game. These people don't have a dog in the fight. It's just about what does the film show and what data can we extract from the film that we can now begin to formulate a game plan that, again, is going to eliminate unnecessary risk from the game. So as we kind of move into this, the one thing that every coach can understand is this. Well, what's the game plan? How are we going to actually achieve this? Because in the past, we've all heard these very broad stroke ideas of, oh, we gotta protect players, oh, we gotta make the game safer. And it all sounds good, but we all have our own personal ideas of what player protection may look like, what safety may even look like. So with that said, as coaches, as teachers, Never have we been all on the same page. We can go through and identify each respective area and say, hey, am I doing a good enough job in this area that's going to provide the best chance and reduce unnecessary risk as it relates to protecting my players as humanly possible? Now we have that game plan. Now we have that blueprint, and that blueprint are called the 5 shields of the game. And the 5 shields obviously is number 1, posture, space and speed, drill selection, language, and best practices. Coaches, these are the 5 areas of our game where collectively we have to be intentional and proactive in making sure that each one of these respective shields, we're doing all that we can humanly possibly do to make sure that we're working towards eliminating and or reducing unnecessary risk within the game. So let's talk through each one here. Posture. Now, here's what makes posture so, I guess you can say, unique, and more so the foundational shield here, because quality posture is the bedrock of all athletic performance. Now, you may say, duh, you're right. That is a no-brainer type statement. But when we think about the athletes of today, and even more so the current climate in which our young athletes have lived in for almost a year now, meaning at home, at the computer, slouching at school, if they're in school, smartphones, tablets, things of that nature, where the world and where technology has taken our young people, and heck, even ourselves, we're spending so much time in a seated position. And while we're seated, oftentimes our spine's around it and our head is down, which means the bulk of your life, and especially our young athletes, the bulk of their life, they spend developing and ingraining inappropriate posture. And then here comes Johnny, football player, that's been sitting in class all day with tight hips, with his back rounded and his head down looking at a tablet and or a computer. And then he comes out to the football field and Jimmy, the football coach, says, hey, I want you to get into a good stance. Well, dramatic, because the idea of what a good stance is at that point in time has completely shifted. The goalposts have probably been moved even further, which means now as coaches, we have to be more aware of the fact that we're dealing with young athletes that aren't exactly where we'd like them to be in terms of the baseline foundational component of performance, which is obviously posture, quality posture. As it relates to our game, spending and investing more time in enforcing, and even some of the parents, if parents on here, enforcing, look, if your son and daughter is sitting in school or sitting at the desk or sitting at the dinner table slouched over, hey, sit up straight. That's not going to be helpful as it relates to you becoming a better football player or a better athlete in general. But as it relates to coaches specifically, spending more time focusing on and even demanding that your athletes are doing everything with proper posture being top of mind. Then we move into space and speed. Well, what's space and speed? Well, space and speed as it relates to obviously specifically tackle football, it's tackling and mobility blocks. I'm going to work backwards. Simply meaning when an offensive lineman gets out into the open field on a DB or a linebacker, anytime he leaves that tackle box and gets out and there's a space and speed component prior to contact, that is what we would deem a mobility block. Obviously, tackling, it's a space and speed component. But here's what's so unique about the areas that's being extracted from the research and the data and the film. Here's what's so unique about this space and speed component. Oftentimes we focus so much on tackling and we say, well, we got a tackling problem in the game. No, we don't. We don't have a tackling problem in football. What we have a posture problem in our game at times. And ironically, the same posture or the inappropriate posture that we see in tackling, it is often taking place in the mobility blocks area of the game. So tackling and mobility blocks, as it relates to space and speed, they're one and the same. They're rooted in improper posture in terms of when things are not being done the way that we like to see them done, play in and play out. So no, there isn't a tackling problem in our game. There isn't a mobility block problem in our game. There is a posture issue as it relates to the space and speed component of the game, which means the energy and our intent has to really be based in and enforcing proper posture, and particularly as it relates to the space and speed area of the game. Now I'm going to backtrack a little bit more here, because remember Johnny, the football player that was sitting at home all day in front of the computer and then spends the rest of the night playing Call of Duty with his boys at night and then sitting in front of the Xbox slouched over eating Doritos. That kid is more than likely going to have a posture problem. So now as coach is trying to get him to execute the drills that we're now trying to get as it relates to maybe better tackling, it's very difficult for that player, because of where his body is at, to be able to function effectively within the space and speed area of the game. So no, it's not always rooted in quote unquote poor coaching. Oftentimes it's circumstance that creates the issue. So our intent and our work has to be more driven in the circumstance and addressing the circumstance, which is posture, in order to begin to alleviate some of the issues that we see in the space and speed area of our game. So on the offensive side and defensive side, the posture within space and speed, that's the area that we need to be intentional in our work and our efforts. Then we get into drill selection. Here's where drills can get a little bit, I guess you can say it's a touchy subject for coaches, because drills are like ice cream. You like vanilla, I like chocolate. Somebody comes in and says, well, I like Neapolitan. It's always that guy, right? So with that said, here's what we have to understand about drills, coaches, and even some parents. Drills will ingrain, reinforce, or create performance behaviors. So as we think about a drill, anything that we do, you want to do as a coach is going to be conducive to getting you and your players from point A to point B, which is them becoming better players, thus to win more games and have a great time in the process doing so. That's what we're trying to accomplish. But we have to oftentimes ask ourselves, are the drills that we're utilizing really developing the behaviors that we want to see in the game? Here's an example. We've seen coaches take drills, a specific drill, and let's say it's an offensive lineman pulling. And the offensive lineman is now pulling, and he's now entering the space and speed area of the game, because he's now left his right guard spot and he's got out into the perimeter on a kick out. And there's a contraption, so to speak, of PVC pipes. And on the backside of the PVC pipe, there's someone holding a bag. And that guard kind of runs down the line of scrimmage, and right before he makes contact with the bag, he has to duck himself under the PVC pipe, thus dropping his head, and then boom, making contact with the bag. Well, first thought is, well, we're trying to teach the player to get lower prior to contact. But when you really analyze what's happening, the player is simply ducking the head prior to contact, which means that particular drill is only reinforcing a behavior that we don't want to see in the game. So now said player now is in a game time situation. This respective play is called. His number is now dialed up. He's out there on this play, and right prior to making contact, what does he do? He drops his head prior to making contact with the opponent, because that's what he has been taught to do. Now, there isn't a coach in the history of football that has ever said to a player, well, there might be one, you never know, but there's none that I've ever been around. And I'm quite sure many of you have never been around any of these type of guys either, that have said to a player, I want you to drop your head, tuck your chin prior to contact. No one is out here for the most part doing that. If you've seen it, I'm quite sure that there's such an uproar that those type of coaches are being further and further pushed away from our game, and rightfully so. But what happens, coaches, is we get caught oftentimes in what is simple, what is easy, and what is comfortable. And also we become just simply creatures of habit, where I'm doing a drill because I was taught this drill when I played, or I'm doing a drill because I'm very familiar with it. But we haven't really taken the time to analyze said drill and then really understand what is it that we're really teaching the players to do. So when we start talking about drills, again, it gets very sensitive for many coaches, because drills, again, it's like ice cream. I love this. Well, coaches, for us to become, or our game to more so to become what we need it to be, we all have to be willing to get a bit out of our comfort zone and begin to truly analyze what we're doing with our players. Another example would be something like bull in the ring, where I know as a former player myself at the younger ages, I've done that drill. And some coaches will say, well, it has relevance to our game because it builds toughness. Well, there's an argument to be made there that that is completely not true. And then I think there's a more important argument to be made about this. What is the purpose of a drill? It's to ingrain, reinforce, or create performance behaviors. Toughness isn't a performance behavior. In fact, we can all make the argument that many of us are not qualified to quote unquote teach toughness. That's the beauty of our game. The game will take care of itself. We don't have to manufacture, we don't have to create anything within the game that's already there. So allow the game to be what the game is going to be, and allow your players to develop at the rate in which they're going to develop. And the bottom line is, our job as coaches is to put the players in the best position that what we're trying to get done, those particular drills are truly building the performance behaviors we want to see inside of our game. Then we get to language. And no, I'm not talking about the language that oftentimes, use in my household with the kids and things of that nature. Oftentimes many of you use as well. I'm talking about our coaching language. Coaching language drives performance behavior. So as it relates to eliminating unnecessary risk from the game, let's talk about use of the helmet. Again, there isn't a coach that's out here coaching anyone to drop the head prior to contact. But then we turn around and we say, well, we want to see our players not use the helmet improperly. Well, there's really not a proper way to use the helmet other than to be what it is, which is simply a protective device. So that then begins to beg this question. If we don't want players leading with the head or lowering the head prior to contact, wouldn't that mean that we have to do a better job of not utilizing coaching cues that are going to be helmet driven? Here's an example. Hat and hands, butt and press, hat on the hat are just a few examples that at the end of the day, coaches, we're actually coaching the helmet back into the game. So now let's work our way back from the top. We can spend all the time that we need building better posture. Boom, we can check that box at some point in time. We can then become more effective in the space and speed area of the game. And then, you know what? We can even start to build out better drills or select better drills that are going to develop the performance behaviors that we like to see. But then what comes out of our mouths eventually begins to undo that. Because Johnny has great form and great positioning, but as a defensive lineman, he's being coached to butt and press. So let's envision this. The right guard is coming out on a zone block, and so it's zoning to the right. And now my 3 technique, he's now being coached to explode off of the ball, lead with his helmet to butt the offensive opponent, and then begin to work his hands into that chest to now maintain or establish outside leverage. Well, again, coaches, our language is driving a performance behavior that we don't want to see. When we hear hat on a hat, and even again, that offensive guard, he's been coached to get screws on screws. So we got the defensive player being coached to butt and press. We got the guard being told to get screws on screws, meaning the helmet of face mask screws on opponent's face mask screws. So he's driving off the ball like a rocket, leading with his helmet because he's trying to get screws on screws. That big defensive lineman has been taught to butt and press. So he's flying off the ball, getting ready to collide and lead in with his head on contact. Now we're creating an environment through our language that we ultimately don't want to continue to see in the game. And it's definitely not putting us in a position to reduce unnecessary risk within our game. So we have to be mindful, coaches, of the type of language that we're using. Now, some of you may be saying, well, what would be an example? How would we then coach this same scenario? Well, from the defensive side, everything is hands first. We're leading everything hands first. Because again, as a former offensive lineman, I would love for a 3 technique to bury his chest or bury his helmet into my chest because you can't see anything. While you're trying to butt me and press me, I'm gonna just throw you on the ground because you've dropped your head into my chest. Now you're blind, you can't see nothing. But the players that I didn't like playing against were the guys like a John Randall. When he came off the ball, the first thing he was gonna hit you with were his hands. And once you strike me with your hands, now at that point, I'm gonna have a much more difficult time establishing outside leverage. You're more likely in control. So from the defensive side, boom, it's hands first. From the offensive side, instead of it being screws to screws, now it's simply coaching that right guard. We're coaching through angles. We're trying to own an angle. So Jimmy, Mr. Right Guard, I want you to take your inside shoulder pad and I want you to pin it to that defender's outside shoulder pad. So now at that point in time, Jimmy is now really working to own that angle because he's been given a coaching cue that is going to be conducive to creating a behavior that we want to see in our game. So now as Jimmy drives off of that ball, he's thinking about taking his inside shoulder and pinning it to that defender's outside shoulder and riding him out and gaining outside leverage. So now, boom, we can try to score touchdowns. But what we've done, coaches, we've removed the helmet from our coaching cues, thus giving our players the best chances to play this game in a way that is going to be leading them in a direction that ultimately we all want them to go in. And then last but not least, as it relates to our shields, we get into what's called best practices. And I kind of alluded to this with the idea that our job as coaches is not to develop tough athletes. That's the beauty of our game. The game takes care of itself. Now, many may not agree with this, but at the end of the day, we all have to kind of ask ourselves, many of us are qualified to do certain things in life, and I don't think there are many people walking the face of the earth that are really qualified to, quote unquote, teach toughness. That's not our roles as coaches. Our roles as coaches is to give players the best opportunity to become the best versions of themselves within the game. That's it. Our jobs as coaches is to give players the tools and the opportunity to become the best version of themselves within the game. Not through the lenses of what we want them to be, not through the lenses of what we believe a football player should be, but the idea of who they truly are. Our game is about expression. Let the athlete express who they are, and our job as coaches is just give them the foundation and the tools to do so, and the game will take care of the rest, which leads us into best practices. Players should leave the game of football more prepared for life. That's our roles. It's to allow the game to build the virtue of build the tools of build what the game game is going to build and instill within these young athletes. We talk about humility and we talk about being quote unquote tough or more resilient. You know what this game does to you? I don't care who you are, and if you play this game at some point in time, and if you're a Hall of Famer on here, it don't even matter, because at some point in time, this game or somebody within this game has kicked you in the teeth. And that's the one thing that life is going to do at some point, or has done to all of us at some point in time. It has kicked us in the freaking teeth. But ironically, isn't a drill that you're going to go through at work that's going to prepare you for when your boss comes in and says, look, we're downsizing. There's no drill for that. Life has to take care of that. It's about being prepared and understanding that there are going to be challenges. How we're going to respond to those challenges and how our athletes respond to those challenges ultimately will reveal slowly who they are as people. There's nothing worse than in this game, on a second and 10, giving up your sack. You get beat by that 3 technique and you just turn around, and the only thing you can do is watch that 3 technique swallow up your quarterback. And then you try to run over there and help your quarterback up, but you see this glazed over look in his eyes, and now the quarterback is thinking like, man, can I trust you? And then you look around at your line mates and they're all looking at you saying, man, don't be that guy. We need you. But now here comes 3rd and 15. 3rd and 15, and that same guy that just kicked your teeth in, you have to come back up and line up and do it again. But this time, for whatever the reason may or may not be, the offensive coordinator decides to slide the protection away from you. So now here you are, Gilligan on an island, facing an opponent just 15 seconds earlier. Well, 15 seconds because we play this new type of football nowadays. 15 seconds earlier, kicked your teeth in. Now you have to respond. There's no coaching for that, own preparation. And that's the best practices part about this game is truly about. When you deal with those circumstances and you leave this game and you get into life, and now you start to struggle in your marriage. Now you start to struggle as a father. Now you start to struggle at work. These moments within our game, it's the preparation that's going to take these young athletes through life. And that's our job as coaches. So how do we do it? How do we get back to the foundation? So looking at posture once again, here's a football camp that I was able to attend and able to grab a couple of snapshots. If you look at the young man to that top left corner, with right underneath or on top of the way to play logo right here, we see clearly inappropriate posture. If this young man, I believe he played linebacker, is in a position where he's trying to make a tackle, or he's in a position where he's having to take on force from an offensive player, obviously that spine is in a flex position, and thus it's not stable, it's not strong. So let's look at a couple of things here before we start talking about the risk involved with this position. Just from a performance standpoint, when that spine in that flex position, it doesn't allow the athlete to, number one, produce maximal force, because now there's a leak, so to speak. So performing at his highest speed or highest velocity or whatever you want to call it, he's not in that position. He's not in a position to be as strong. So when he's now taking an opponent and trying to get a block, he's not in a position to be as strong, and that trunk isn't as robust as it needs to be. So what do you have now, coaches? You have a guy that just based on his alignment, he's not giving you the best chance to win. He's not giving himself the best chance to be successful. So we talk about the little things in our game. It's a game of inches. Yes, that is all true. But it's also a game where every little detail matters. Maybe, just maybe, coaches, maybe, just maybe, you won one game this year. Maybe, just maybe, if we begin to focus on the details of things like posture, maybe it puts you in a position where now you are in a position to win 2 games next year. You might have been a coach that were a game or play or whatever away from the state championship. overhauling your entire offense or overhauling your entire defense that's really going to make any type of headway when you're that this game. And what's really important is this, that don't give us the best chance to be the best performers that players obviously can be when they're in alignment like this. Now, as it relates to unnecessary risk, do I really need to talk about that? I don't think you want anyone taking on a running back with that spine in that position. No way, no how. So as we kind of flash forward through this, being intentional, we're able to take the young athlete to the side and now start to put him into a position where now that spine in that third image is now in a much better position to play this game the way it's supposed to be played. And here's the cool thing about it, coaches. It took 5 minutes. It took 5 minutes and a few simple coaching cues, and boom, now you, number one, have a better football player, and number two, you have a player that can now truly protect himself. And you've done that because you've taken the time to do so. Here's the cool thing about this. So we take the athlete through this process and he gets in that final position. You know what he says? He says, "This isn't comfortable." Yeah, it's not comfortable, because if you go back up here, if you imagine him sitting in a chair, he's at home on his iPad. He's at home playing Call of Duty. This is his new normal. Like where we're in right now, this new normal, this is his new normal. But when you actually get him into a position in which he's supposed to be, it's uncomfortable. And that's where we have to challenge ourselves and challenge our players to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because for a while, yes, this is not going to feel good to your players. But I can promise you this, in time, they will notice the difference. And when athletes see themselves and feel themselves getting better, what do, coaches? You know this, they take ownership of it. They take ownership of it, and now that new normal becomes normal. And suddenly, when they end up in positions like this, now this isn't comfortable anymore. The key component to this right here, and I guess at some point in time, if we're doing these more, more frequently, or if you need more information, we can always try to get that to you. But the idea simply, coaches, is building out athletes that understand how to hinge, the hinge position. Every football position on the field, every good athlete understands how to hinge. Let's think about, if you're familiar with the weight room, let's not even take it to the weight room. Let's keep this very simple. Let's talk about moving furniture. I'm quite sure all of us at some point have picked up a couch. Imagine getting on the edge of a couch and just simply standing in front of it, and all you're doing is dropping your shoulders forward, thus rounding your spine, and trying to get your fingers underneath the couch, and now trying to forklift the couch up. We've all done this silly stuff, which means we all at some point in time have had what? Sore low backs. I'm sitting in a chair right now, and damn it, my back hurts too from doing stuff like that in the past. When we think about hinging, what does a hinge actually mean? It means that we're now, instead of just simply falling forward with the shoulders, we're actually having a slight bend in the knees, and we're now thinking about pushing the hips back, which is going to create more tension at the top of the hamstring. Now, instead of our shoulders just falling forward, we can imagine a ruler or broomstick being aligned down in the middle of our back, right down our spine. And as we fall forward, that broomstick or that ruler, it just stays nice and straight, nice and straight, nice and straight. Backwards. That's a hinge. And that's the base of every single stance on a football field. Every single one. Now, there are 3 general and universal phases of football at every level. 3. Doesn't matter how smart of coaches we think we are, there are 3 phases of this game. The first phase, Aha, the posture phase. And if you look at this linebacker right here, you remember that hinge position that we were talking about? Pushing the hips back. And imagine there being a ruler. I don't know if you guys can see this little arrow moving. I'm gonna just assume that you can. But imagine going from the top of that Texans logo and coming straight down to his back. If he were to go forward more, that ruler would just stay nice and static and it doesn't fall off because he hasn't rounded his back. That is a hinge position. So the posture phase, it's the phase of our game that every single player starts in before the ball is snapped. It's simply a stance. So we say again, it's a game of inches. Everything matters. Well, you want to have better results in your outside zone? Well, maybe you should start beginning to look at how your players are aligned on the defensive and offensive side of the ball as it relates to their posture. Because posture is going to create stability, strength, and vision. Those are the three things that we're looking for. Who doesn't want a more stable athlete, a stronger athlete, or an athlete that has more vision, thus can react? That's what good posture can do for your athletes as it relates to performance. So the posture phase is the initial phase within our game. Then we move on to the approach phase. What does it mean? It means once we get into our stance, the ball is then snapped. And now our players begin to move into contact or execute X, Y, or Z play, whatever it may be. Prior to contact, that is what's called our approach phase. A wide receiver out in the slot, posture. Ball is snapped, he gets ready to run his route. Approach. He makes his cut, boom, here comes the ball, catches the ball. Finish phase. But before the finish, we're now in the approach. Every single player goes through an approach phase. What are we looking for? Knee bend, pads down, head up. But we can't achieve 1, 2, and 3 if we don't start with 1, 2, and 3. You see how this is all kind of connecting now? We want great posture in the beginning, which now allows our athletes to be better movers. We now have better movers, means we have a more consistent, capable, and confident finisher. So now as our athletes are now in that finish phase, which means they've gone through posture, approach, boom, contact, or finish, what do we want? Capable, confident, and consistent. That's what we're looking for. Capable, confident, and consistent. But we don't get to number 3 without number 2, and most certainly without number 1. So again, coaches, this is why posture is so important. It is the fundamental of all of the phases of our game. It's the fundamental stage. Posture, approach, finish. So what's our key takeaway here, coaches? It's simply this. When we build better posture, we build a better tackler. We build a better blocker. We build a better game. That's all. It's really that simple. So nowhere in this process have you heard me say or anyone say that it's about making the game softer. We're trying to take away aggression. No, we're not. We're trying to make the game more performance-driven and, most importantly, eliminating unnecessary risk. But now, coaches, we have a process. We have areas in which we are now focused in achieving that goal collectively. Collectively. There's no more excuses as to, well, I got my way and Jimmy got his way and Bobby has his way. No, 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 no. This is our game. Our game collectively. We build better posture. We build a better tackler. We build a better blocker. We build a better game together. And that's how the NFL way to play is positioned. That is the mission. That is the driving foundational goal of the NFL way to play. Now, there's much more to it in terms of how we're going to go through that process. But again, as I started off, I wanted to give a very broad overview of where we're going. Setting the GPS, we drop the pen. Now, there's going to be some twists and turns to get there. We're going to need your help. your opinions, your ideas, your input to get there. But at the end of the day, the applied science, the research, and the data is really what's going to drive this. And that's collectively what we have to get our arms wrapped around, because we can't argue. We cannot argue, or at least continue to argue with what we see and what we know is the truth. And no, this isn't an indictment on any coach or any coaching behavior or any coaching philosophy. The fact is the fact. And we can't say, well, I do it the right way, but then 10 other schools in your league is doing it the wrong way. It means that those 10 other schools are going to pull our entire game down. And so those that are doing it the right way, unfortunately, to whom much is given, much is expected. Some of us have to shoulder more of that burden to make sure that our game and our athletes stay healthy. And that's the mission of the NFL Way to Play. And I'm done. And I don't really know how to work all this Zoom stuff at this point. So I don't know if I got questions or what I got right now. I just know that I got this slide up, and I'm gonna put this right here because I think it looks more professional or something. And I'm gonna just wait to see what someone has to say.
There was one question in the chat. It's, and if you can hear me, LeCharles, it's how can this current generation of young coaches who have learned the game through Madden, fantasy football, etc., grasp these concepts?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that the easiest way to do that is to simply have those coaches do this. Sit down in a chair, sit up tall, pull their shoulders back, put the eyes forward, or at least the cervical spine in a neutral position, and hold that position for 2 minutes. And watch how hard it is for many of those guys. And why? I said, well, why do that? You need to feel it. You need to understand what quality posture feels like. And at the end of the day, how truly intentional we have to be to build it. Because again, we can talk about the athletes, but the fact of the matter is we're all addicted to these darn smartphones. All of us are on Twitter with our head down and on IG with our head down. And right now we're probably sitting all in front of our computers, sitting down and comfortable as hell. None of us are sitting probably in proper position. But as it relates to our kids, they're in fact doing it more and longer than we are. So how do you get and grasp these concepts? You simply have to feel it. You have to be able to feel what you're teaching. Because if you can't connect to that tactical aspect of the game, well, you're gonna have a hard time executing these, the schemes and these ideas of what you think the game is gonna be. It's like trying to be a chef, but you don't even taste your food. That doesn't make much sense. Don't ever go to a restaurant of a guy or a woman that doesn't taste their own food. I don't care how many recipe books you've read. It doesn't matter. From Martha Stewart to Emerald Lagasse, I don't care. If you aren't tasting your sauce, don't serve it to me. So that's how. Get out here, move around, feel it. Feel your own bodies. Once you begin to feel your own body, you understand the complexity and how intentional we all have to be and actually begin to alleviate these issues in our game.
That was the last question.
That is awesome. I hope everyone enjoyed their time. You guys take care, and you women take care of yourselves, and hopefully I have an opportunity to do this again. I had 45 minutes. I made 44 minutes. Exactly. Boom. Nailed it. Typical offensive lineman, always on time.